It's a chill autumn night in 1888, and the fog rolls thick through the narrow lanes of Whitechapel, muffling the distant cries of street hawkers and the clip-clop of weary horses. In this gloom, a monster prowls, his footsteps lost in the cacophony of the city's underbelly. His name would echo through history like a curse: Jack the Whipper. For more than 130 years now, his identity has tantalized detectives, historians, and armchair sleuths alike, making this the most infamous cold case the world has ever known. Over 100 suspects have been named, from disgraced doctors to deranged royals, but the truth remains shrouded in that same East End fog. But let's pause here before we chase phantoms through the alleys. This isn't merely a tale of an elusive killer. It's a grim portrait of the world that birthed him. Jack the Ripper didn't emerge from nowhere. He was a product of Whitechapel, a festering cauldron of Victorian inequality, where the British Empire's glittering triumphs cast long, dark shadows over the forgotten. In the late 19th century, London was the heart of the world's largest empire, a beacon of industrial might and colonial wealth. Yet, just a stone's throw from the opulent West End theaters and the bustling stock exchange lay this labyrinth of despair. To understand the Ripper, we must first step into the suffocating reality of Whitechapel. Its poverty so deep it devoured souls, its desperation so raw it turned neighbors into strangers, and its darkness so profound it concealed horrors in plain sight. This is the story of a place that made monsters possible. By 1888, London was a colossus, a sprawling metropolis of over 5 million souls, the unchallenged capital of an empire on which the sun never set. Factories churned out steam engines and textiles for global markets. The Thames teemed with ships laden with spices from India and cotton from America. Gaslight illuminated grand boulevards where gentlemen in top hats strolled past ladies in silk gowns. But peel back that veneer of progress, and you'd find the East End, a sprawling warren of squalor, stretching from the City of London's financial towers to the docks of the Isle of Dogs. At its rotten core pulsed Whitechapel, a district of just 1 square mile crammed with over 80,000 residents, equivalent to a modern mid-sized city, shoehorned into a medieval village. The geography here was a nightmare, engineered by unchecked urbanization. Whitechapel wasn't built, it metastasized. In the 1880s, waves of rural migrants and Irish famine refugees flooded in, drawn by the promise of factory work but trapped by its scarcity. The result? A dizzying maze of rookeries, those notorious tenement blocks where entire families squeezed into single rooms, sharing walls paper thin with the moans of the sick and the shouts of the drunk. Narrow alleys like Thrall Street or Flower and Dean, once genteel courts for weavers, had devolved into fetid warrens, their doorways flanked by gin palaces and pawnbrokers. Buck's Row, where the Ripper would claim his first victim, was a typical artery, a dimly lit thoroughfare, hemmed by slaughterhouses and stables, where the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood from the nearby Whitechapel market. This wasn't just poor, it was perilously close to Paradise Lost. Whitechapel sat a mere mile east of the city, that gilded hive of bankers and brokers where fortunes were made in a morning's trade. Walk west for 20 minutes from the Ripper's hunting grounds, and you'd emerge into affluence, horse-drawn cabs ferrying the elite to the Royal Exchange, while omnibuses carried clerks in starched collars. But turn east, and the divide sharpened into a chasm. The Thames, that lifeblood of empire, poisoned the air with its sewage-choked stench, exacerbated by open gutters that snaked through the streets like veins of filth. Coal smoke from a million hearths blackened the sky, turning day into perpetual twilight. And the sounds? Unrelenting, a symphony of misery, the screech of iron wheels on uneven cobblestones, the bellow of costermongers hawking wilted greens for a hobby, the wails of barefoot children scavenging for coal scraps. And at night, The eerie silence broken only by the occasional Bobby's whistle or a woman's desperate sob. Sanitation was a cruel joke. With no indoor plumbing, residents slopped chamber pots into overflowing cesspits, breeding cholera and typhus that claimed thousands yearly. Slaughterhouses dotted the district, over 30 in Whitechapel alone, their offal dumped into the streets, attracting rats the size of cats. Gas lamps, those flickering heralds of modernity, were sparse and unreliable, casting pools of yellow light amid vast expanses of inky black. In this deliberate obscurity, alleys too tight for patrols, courtyards blind to the main roads, predators thrived. Victims, too, had no choice but to navigate it. Women slipping into shadows for a hurried transaction, men staggering home from the pub. Whitechapel wasn't merely a slum, it was a parallel universe, invisible to the empire's architects, where the proximity of wealth only amplified the rage of the dispossessed. Here, in this geographic trap, Jack the Ripper found his perfect veil. So, who called this hellhole home? Whitechapel was the empire's refuse heap, a teeming cauldron for the displaced and the defeated. The population had ballooned threefold in just 40 years, fueled by the Industrial Revolution's cruel math. Machines displaced artisans, enclosures evicted farmers, and the docks lured the unskilled with false hopes. By 1888, the district housed a polyglot mosaic: Cockney laborers, Irish navvies hardened by the Great Famine, and a surging tide of Eastern European Jews fleeing Tsarist pogroms. Between 1881 and 1891, over 100,000 Jews arrived in London's East End, many landing penniless in Whitechapel. They brought tailoring skills and Yiddish laments, but also sparked xenophobic whispers of alien overcrowding, fueling riots like the Bloody Sunday clashes of 1887. Poverty wasn't abstract here, it was visceral, a daily grind that ground people to dust. Average wages hovered at 15 shillings a week for a skilled man, barely enough for bread and rent, while the unskilled scraped by on half that. Unemployment was rampant. Seasonal dock work or match factory drudgery vanished with a whim. For shelter, the desperate turned to doss houses, those grim emporiums of endurance, licensed under the Common Lodging Houses Act, but often worse than the street. Picture the scene: a cavernous room in a converted warehouse on Dorset Street. Lit by a single stub of candle were 200 souls, men, women, children, huddle on straw-stuffed pallets or lean against grease-slick walls. For 4 pence, the infamous 4-penny doss, you claimed a coffin-like bunk for 12pence. The hangover, a taut rope slung across a bench to slump against till dawn. No privacy, no peace. Fleas feasted, tuberculosis coughed through the ranks, and petty theft was the night's entertainment. These weren't outliers, they were the norm. Over 8,000 dossers rotated through Whitechapel's 233 lodging houses nightly, a transient army of the invisible. Families splintered, husbands to the workhouse, wives to the streets, while children hawked bootlaces or flowers to evade the poor law's orphanages. Cultural clashes simmered. Jewish sweatshops churned out cheap coats amid anti-Semitic graffiti, while Irish pubs overflowed with brawls. Crime festered not from vice but survival. Pickpockets in the markets, burglars in the rookeries. The police, understaffed and overstretched, with just one bobby per 1,000 residents, they patrolled in pairs, their truncheons more deterrent than defense. Whitechapel was a tinderbox, where economic despair ignited social fuses, and every face bore the hollow stare of the expendable. In this human crush, individuality dissolved. People became ghosts, unseen until tragedy forced a glance. Amid this maelstrom, no group suffered more acutely than the single women of Whitechapel, the unseen scaffolding of Victorian morality, buckling under its weight. In an era where a woman's worth was measured by hearth and husband, widowhood, desertion, or spinsterhood spelled catastrophe. Legitimate work? A cruel mirage. The few options: seamstresses stitching 18-hour days for pennies, match girls dipping lucifer tips till their jaws rotted from phosphorus fumes, or charwomen scrubbing West End mansions at dawn, paid a pittance, 9 shillings weekly if you were lucky, often docked for mistakes. Illness struck like lightning, a bout of bronchitis, and eviction loomed. With no welfare net beyond the stigmatized workhouse, those bastilles of forced labor and humiliation, fall was swift and final. These women teetered on a razor's edge, one misshift from the 4-penny coffin, that meager rope-dead lifeline. Without it, the streets beckoned, pavements slick with rain, shadowed by looming warehouses. For many, prostitution wasn't vice but arithmetic, a quick encounter in an alley for trippence, enough for lodging and gin to numb the cold. Police tallies pegged 1,200 low-class prostitutes in Whitechapel alone, but the true number swelled with casual unfortunates, women like the Ripper's eventual prey, driven out after dark when clients dinned and dangers multiplied. They solicited in pairs for safety, whispering to passing laborers or sailors, but the rookery's design betrayed them. Blind corners, echoing courts, no witnesses but the rats. This wasn't liberation, it was entrapment. Victorian propriety condemned him as fallen women, yet society engineered their fall, denying education, property rights, or divorce without scandal. The victims we remember were no strangers to this curse, ordinary souls eroded by circumstance. Marianne Nichols, separated from a violent husband, hawked flowers till her health crumbled. Annie Chapman, widowed young, peddled crochet lace between hospital stays for malnutrition. Their nights on the prowl weren't choices but chains, forging them into the most disposable of prey. In Whitechapel's gloom, these women weren't just vulnerable, they were erased, ghosts haunting the empire's blind spots, their pleas drowned in the din of progress. To quantify this abyss, we turn to a beacon of Victorian conscience, Charles Booth, the Liverpool shipping magnate turned reformer. Skeptical of politicians' rosy poverty stats, Booth launched his inquiry into the life and labor of the people in London in 1886, a Herculean project spanning 17 years, 450 interviewers, and 500,000 interviews. The crown jewel? His descriptive map of London poverty, a 30-sheet cartographic indictment unveiled in 1889, color-coding every street by class: gold for the wealthy, red for the comfortable, pink for the struggling, blue for the poor, and black for the aged. Vicious, semi-criminal underclass. Whitechapel, a sea of indigo despair. Booth's brush painted over 80% of its lanes dark blue or black. Home to the casual poor scraping minimum earnings from odd jobs, and the lowest class, where chronic unemployment bred thievery and vice. Flower and Dean Street, that infamous rookery, gleamed black, a warren of 400 souls in 13 houses, rife with unlicensed dossers and no-go for police. Murder sites like Bucks Row and Mitre Square, solid black, their residents valued at least of all by society. Booth's notebooks brim with testimonies. Here the people are herded like pigs. Drink and disease rampant. His maps didn't just chart geography. They exposed poverty's geography, clustered in the East End, ignored by Westminster, where 31% of Londoners languished in destitution versus 3% in the West. This visual thunderclap was a warning unheeded at first, but prescient. In the Ripper's shadow, Booth's work whispered, the killer wasn't an aberration, but a symptom. Thin police lines, scarce amid budget cuts, left the vulnerable exposed, their lives cheap as the gin that dealt them. Whitechapel wasn't damned by fate, it was engineered by apathy. A black and blue scar on the empire's map, begging for reform that would only come decades later. Into this powder keg stepped the Ripper, his blade flashing in the late summer haze of 1888. The Whitechapel murders spanned 1888 to 1991, claiming at least 11 lives. But the core horror, the Autumn of Terror, calling from the world ripple, unfolded in a feverish 9 weeks, from August 31st to November 9th. These 5 killings, dubbed the Canonical Five by ripperologists for their shared savagery, throats slashed, abdomens eviscerated, organs excised with almost surgical flair, bear the Ripper's unmistakable mark. Unlike the era's blunt garrottings or knifings, these were ritualistic, intimate, performed in the open yet unseen. First, Mary Ann Polly Nichols, 43, a flower seller and occasional charwoman, her life unraveled by alcoholism and a philandering husband. Found at 3:40 a.m. in Bucks Row, her skirt hiked, throat gashed twice, body mutilated under the railway arch, her cry stifled, her killer dawn in minutes. A week later, September 8th, Annie Chapman, 47, a sickly hawker of leather bootlaces, widowed with 2 drowned children and estranged son in an asylum. In the backyard of 29 Harnberry Street, amid the clamor of a morning market, she lay gutted, uterus removed, her last client a phantom in the dawn. Then, the double event of September 30th, Elizabeth Long Liz Strige, 44, a Swedish immigrant and laundry worker, teetotaler, supporting her carpenter husband. In Dutfield's yard off Burner Street, interrupted mid-act, her throat cut clean, but body otherwise intact, perhaps spooked by a cart's approach. Less than an hour later, across the city border, Catherine Kate Edoes, 46, a casual cleaner and cigar maker, hawk-nosed and lurid, fresh from the drunk tank. In Mitra Square, the mutilations escalated. Face slashed, intestines draped over her shoulder, kidney and uterus harvested, her cries lost in the Jewish quarter's Sabbath hush. Finally, November 9th, Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest at 25, an Irish beauty with a velvet voice, once a barmaid, now whiling away in Miller's Court. Inside her cramped Spitalfields room, the carnage peaked, body flayed, heart missing, walls spattered, a private slaughterhouse that horrified even hardened cops. These weren't random, they were escalations in a dark theater. The killer taunting the Met Police's 13-man Whitechapel team with their inadequacy. An ordinary man, unseen, unremarkable. He vanished into the fog, leaving a city paralyzed by the realization evil wore no mask in Whitechapel. The Ripper's blade cut deeper than flesh. It sliced into the soul of journalism, birthing the tabloid beast we know today. In 1888, newspapers were exploding, circulation doubling to millions as penny dreadfuls evolved into mass-market dailies. The Pall Mall Gazette's exposes on child prostitution had already primed a pump. Now, the Ripper murders flooded them with gore. Papers like The Star and Evening News jettisoned restraint for revenue, splashing lurid headlines. Another woman butchered, or Leather Apron, the Mad Jew. Their dispatches, graphic morgue details, witness sketches, wild theories, gripped literate public, sales surging 60% overnight. The killer, wittingly or not, fed the frenzy. On September 25th, the Dear Boss letter arrived at the Central News Agency. Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Signed with that blood-chilling moniker, likely a journalist's hoax. It was published September 27th, coining the name. Days later, the saucy Jackie postcard mocked the double murder. Aha, missed me again. Double event this time. Over 200 missives followed, some gory fabrications, like the kidney scraps sent to George Lusk of the Vigilance Committee. But the press devoured them, printing verbatim. This wasn't reporting, it was theater, turning a serial slayer into a celebrity anti-hero, his brand etched in newsprint. The fallout? Profound. Sensationalism eroded trust in the press, sparked anti-immigrant hysteria, and even prompted royal inquiries fueled by absurd prince-on-the-run tales. Yet, it illuminated Whitechapel's woes, pressuring Parliament for reforms. Jack the Ripper wasn't just a murderer. Through ink and ink alone, he became myth, a gothic specter born of headlines, haunting us still. The canonical five eclipse the rest, but Whitechapel's ledger of blood runs longer. 11 murders in the official file, plus assaults blurring the lines. Before Polly, Emma Smith. April 3rd, 1888, a 45-year-old laundress gang raped and beaten on Osborne Street, dying in agony. Her attackers, teenage Whitechapel toughs, not the Ripper's solo blade. Martha Tabram. August 7th, a 35-year-old hawker stabbed 39 times in George Yard. Her frenzied wounds a possible prelude. After Kelly, the echoes lingered. Alice McDenney, July 1889. Throat cut in Castle Alley, the Pinchin Street torso. September 1890, a woman's bisected remains dumped like refuse. Frances Coles, February 1891, strangled in Swallow Gardens. Her killer perhaps the same shadow. These non-canonicals underscore the terror's breadth. Not one fiend, but a plague of violence, in a district where women vanished weekly. Ultimately, 1888 indicts more than a ghost. It's a mirror to Victorian blindness. Jack the Ripper was monstrous, yes, but forged in the forge of neglect. Slums unslummed, voices unheard, reforms delayed. His crimes pried open Whitechapel's wounds, birthing social surveys, housing acts, and a reckoning with empire's undercarriage. The legend endures because it forces us to stare into that abyss, not just the killers, but societies. In the fog of progress, monsters multiply. Only light scatters them. And in Whitechapel, that light came too late for the five. And